Aaliyah Mensima stood outside the tall gate of her aunt's house in East Legon, her hand resting on the doorbell longer than necessary. The smell of grilled meat floated in the air mixed with loud laughter and music. She didn't want to be there. Family gatherings always reopened old wounds, but her mother had begged her to come just for a few hours. So she came, quiet, careful, already preparing herself to feel small. She wore a light summer dress because the Accra heat was unforgiving. It exposed the long scar on her shoulder, something she usually hid without thinking. Today she forgot. Or maybe she hoped no one would notice. The backyard was full of relatives. Expensive cars lined the driveway. People laughed loudly, plates full, phones already recording stories for social media. When Aaliyah greeted her aunt, Mame Yara Boateng looked her up and down with a tight smile. Her eyes stopped at the scar. Well, Mame Yara said loudly, holding a drink. Aaliyah, you're brave to show that thing like this. Summer fashion, huh? A few people chuckled. Then more laughter followed. Who will marry a girl with such a mark? The aunt added, joking as if it were harmless fun. Phones tilted slightly. Cousins covered their mouths, laughing. No one defended her. Not even her mother, who stared at the ground, afraid to speak. Aaliyah felt her chest tighten. Her face stayed calm, but inside something broke. She smiled weakly, stepped away from the crowd and told herself the same lie she always did, that she was used to this. But the laughter followed her, and so did the pain she thought she had buried long ago. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, sharper, like it had been waiting for permission. Mame Yara leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the attention, her voice rising above the music and chatter. Honestly, she said, shaking her head, who will marry you with that ugly mark on your shoulder? The words landed hard. A few people gasped, but most laughed. Someone clapped. Someone else repeated the joke under their breath. Aaliyah felt every eye turn toward her, then slide to the scar like it was a public display. She noticed her cousins first. Not their faces, but their phones. One cousin pretended to adjust her hair while the camera pointed straight at Aaliyah. Another tilted his phone just enough to catch her reaction. They were recording. For laughs. For views. For later. Aaliyah's hands trembled, so she folded them together to hide it. She searched the crowd for her mother. When their eyes met, her mother looked away almost immediately. Fear sat heavy on her face. She depended on this family. She couldn't afford to speak up. That silence hurt more than the laughter. Mame Yara wasn't done. In my time, she continued, smiling cruelly, men wanted perfect women, not damaged ones. Something inside Aaliyah went quiet. The noise faded like someone had turned the volume down on the world. Her heart began to pound, slow and heavy. The smell of smoke from the grill suddenly felt too familiar. Her mind drifted, pulling her backward in time. Heat, flames, screaming. For a split second she wasn't in East Legon anymore. She was younger, smaller, running barefoot on hot ground, smoke burning her eyes, people shouting names, children crying. She remembered fire licking the walls, the crackling sound, the fear in people's voices. She remembered pain, sharp, sudden, unforgettable. Aaliyah blinked, forcing herself back to the present. The barbecue was still there. The laughter. The music. The cameras. But her breathing had changed. Her eyes darkened, not with anger but with something deeper. Memory. Survival. She touched her scar lightly, not to hide it, but because it suddenly felt heavier than skin. It wasn't just a mark. It was a story. One no one here knew. One no one had ever asked about. As Mame Yara laughed again, Aaliyah stayed silent. But inside her, the past had awakened. And whatever that scar truly meant was slowly pushing its way to the surface. 10 years earlier, Tamale was loud that afternoon. The sun was harsh, the market was crowded, and Aaliyah was just 15, walking home with her little cousin. She remembers the smell first. Guess. Sharp and wrong. Then a sound so loud it shook the ground beneath her feet. Boom. Fire exploded into the air. People screamed. Stalls caught fire within seconds. Thick black smoke rolled through the street, blocking the sky. Children cried, running in different directions, calling for their parents. Adults panicked. No one knew where to go. Aaliyah froze for one heartbeat. Then she saw them. 3 small children trapped near a burning kiosk, coughing, too scared to move. Without thinking, she pushed her cousin toward safety and ran back toward the fire. "Follow me," she shouted, her voice cracking. The heat was unbearable. Flames licked her arms as she reached for the first child and pulled him free. Her dress caught fire for a moment. She slapped it out and kept going. People were shouting at her to stop, to run, but she couldn't. Not when the children were still there. She went back again. And again. On the third trip something exploded behind her. She felt a sharp burning pain rip across her shoulder. She screamed but didn't stop. She dragged the last child out just as the kiosk collapsed into flames. Then her legs gave out. She hit the ground hard, dizzy, choking on smoke. Everything spun. She thought she might die there, surrounded by fire and noise. Somewhere far away she heard boots pounding the ground and men shouting orders. Soldiers rushed in. They had been nearby for a security operation. One of them dropped to his knees beside her, pressing cloth against her bleeding shoulder. "Stay with me," he said firmly, looking straight into her eyes. His voice was calm, steady, like an anchor in the chaos. "You're safe now." She tried to speak but couldn't. The world faded in and out as they lifted her onto a stretcher. She caught one last glimpse of the children she had saved, crying but alive, before everything went dark. That soldier stayed with her until the ambulance arrived. He held her hand even when she stopped responding. His name, she would later learn, was Kwame Dlamini. Colonel Kwame Dlamini. Back then she didn't know his rank. She didn't know he would remember her. All she knew was that the fire had taken something from her, and left something behind. A scar the world would later mock, and a story no one believed was worth telling. The music lowered for a moment as the gate opened. All eyes turned to the driveway. A sleek black SUV rolled in, and out stepped a tall man in a crisp military uniform. His medals caught the sunlight and his posture was perfect, calm, disciplined, commanding respect without saying a word. This was Colonel Kwame Dlamini, Mame Yara's husband, a man known in Accra for his service, his authority, and his quiet strength. He walked across the yard with measured steps, greeting everyone politely. "Good afternoon," he said, nodding to the neighbors and cousins, shaking hands with uncles and aunts. His smile was warm but professional. The family seemed proud, all beaming at the sight of him. He laughed lightly at one of Mame Yara's jokes, but something in his eyes kept scanning the crowd. Then he stopped. From across the yard, his gaze fixed on Aaliyah. Something in her stance, the curve of her shoulder, caught him off guard. He blinked once, then twice, his expression changing in an instant, from polite observer to stunned recognition. His hand paused midair, the greeting forgotten. Aaliyah felt it before she saw him fully. The weight of someone staring so intensely, quietly, without saying a word. It wasn't judgment and it wasn't curiosity. It was something else. Something sharp, painful, and full of memory. Her stomach tightened, but she tried to keep her face calm. He didn't approach immediately. Instead he remained still, studying her from a distance. He swallowed, glanced at Mame Yara, then back at Aaliyah. A faint tremble passed over his jaw, almost imperceptible. Something flickered in his eyes. Shock, recognition, maybe guilt. Everyone else carried on, unaware. Drinks were poured, laughter resumed, and music played, but Aaliyah felt like time had slowed. The yard seemed smaller, the voices fainter. The colonel's presence, the way he was staring at her, made her past feel alive, right there in front of her. She wanted to look away, to hide the scar that had already drawn cruel laughter earlier. But something told her not to. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't judging. He was seeing her, the real her, and the realization made her heartbeat quicken. And as he finally took a careful step toward her, a hush seemed to settle over the moment. Something important was about to happen and everyone, unknowingly, was about to witness it. Aaliyah quietly stepped away from the laughter and chatter of the barbecue. She didn't want anyone to see her face, the tightness in her chest, or the way her hands shook slightly. The garden offered a small refuge. A quiet corner shaded by tall bougainvillea, where the noise of the party softened to a dull hum. She sank onto a low stone bench, tucking her arms around her knees, letting herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. Her mind drifted away from the crowd. She thought about her life in Cape Coast, where she worked as a nurse in a small but busy hospital. She cared for people who had little but gave so much, patients who needed kindness more than medicine sometimes. She worked long hours, quietly, without anyone praising her, without anyone knowing the stories of the lives she saved or the nights she spent comforting crying mothers. Her scar, her constant reminder, was part of her, part of the sacrifices no one applauded. Her apartment in Abura was small and modest, nothing like the luxury houses around Accra. But it was hers. She had painted the walls a soft cream, added little touches, plants by the window, a handmade lamp, and she loved it. Simple things gave her peace, even if the world didn't notice her effort. Yet peace was fragile. At night, when the city grew quiet, the memories of that fire came back. The screams of the children, the heat on her skin, the weight of the last one she saved. It all replayed like a movie she couldn't stop. She still woke up sweating, heart racing, nightmares leaving her trembling in the darkness. And even though she tried to move forward, the world often treated her differently because of that scar. People didn't see her courage. They saw marks and made jokes. She had learned to carry the pain silently, to hide the vulnerability, to live modestly and help others quietly. As she sat there in the garden, her eyes followed a butterfly landing gently on a flower. A small smile appeared on her lips, the kind of smile that hinted at strength, not weakness. She didn't need anyone to notice her courage or her pain. She had survived, she had helped, and she had grown. That quiet determination, the invisible battles she fought every day, made her who she was. And deep down she knew this was just the beginning of her story. The garden felt even quieter as Colonel Kwame Dlamini stepped carefully toward her. He didn't speak at first, just walked slowly, his eyes fixed on her shoulder, the scar that had drawn so much mockery. When he finally stopped in front of her, he didn't smile, he didn't make small talk. He looked at her seriously, almost like he was searching her face for something buried deep in memory. "Where did you get that scar?" he asked softly, his voice low but steady. There was no judgment, only curiosity and something heavier, something like awe. Aaliyah swallowed hard, her throat tight. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should speak. But the weight in his gaze made the memories rush back. She took a deep breath and began. 10 years ago, she started quietly. In Tamale, there was a fire, a big explosion in the market. Children were trapped. I went back and pulled them out. I got burned badly. Her voice shook slightly and her eyes dropped to the ground. I thought I was going to die that day. The colonel's face changed immediately. His eyes widened and he took a small step closer. He didn't interrupt, just listened, letting her speak, letting the story sink in. When she finished, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old, slightly worn folder. He opened it, revealing a military report from that day. He tapped the paper gently, his finger landing on her name printed in bold. "You saved my entire rescue team that day," he said, his voice catching slightly. "Every single one of them would not have made it without you. We tried to recognize you at the time, but your bravery was kept quiet for security reasons. I remember your face, your courage, everything. You were remarkable." He paused, emotion flickering across his normally controlled face. "Aaliyah Mensima," he said firmly, "you are a national hero. This scar, it's not a weakness. It's proof of your courage, proof of what you risked to save lives. Do you understand? You risked everything for others." Aaliyah's eyes welled up. She had spent so long hiding her past, feeling shame whenever anyone looked at her scar. Now hearing these words from the man who had witnessed part of it, the man who had been there that day, she felt something shift inside. Recognition, validation, and maybe, finally, a little peace. The colonel's gaze softened. "You don't just carry a scar," he said gently. "You carry a story of heroism, one that the world needs to know." The music faded again as Colonel Kwame Dlamini called everyone's attention. Voices stopped, laughter died down, and curious eyes turned toward him. Mame Yara, still sipping her drink, raised an eyebrow. The colonel's expression was serious, commanding silence without a word. "Everyone, please listen," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I have something important to share about Aaliyah." Whispers started, people shifting uneasily, sensing that this was not going to be another casual family story. Aaliyah stepped forward slowly, her hands clasped together. She felt her heart pounding, a mix of fear and anticipation. The colonel began. 10 years ago in Tamale there was a fire at the market. Many children were trapped. Amidst the chaos, one young woman risked her life to save them. She went back into the flames, pulled children out, and was badly injured herself. That young woman is Aaliyah Mensima. Gasps spread through the crowd. Phones tilted, capturing the moment as the colonel continued. He opened a folder and held up documents and photographs. Old photos showed Aaliyah carrying children, her small frame surrounded by smoke and chaos. Official military papers confirmed her bravery. She received a secret military commendation at the time, the colonel explained. Her courage saved my entire rescue team and countless lives. We kept it quiet for safety, but her heroism is undeniable. She is a national hero. The reaction was instantaneous. Cousins who had laughed at her earlier stared in shock. Phones that had captured embarrassing videos now recorded a different truth. Comments and jokes that once humiliated her suddenly looked cruel. Mame Yara's face turned pale. Her laughter vanished completely, replaced by disbelief and a flicker of guilt. She opened her mouth but no words came out. The family shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring, all processing the truth that had been hidden for so long. Aaliyah stood taller now, her spine straight, her chest lighter. The scar on her shoulder, once a mark of shame, now symbolized courage and sacrifice. Social media might have laughed, but reality had flipped the story completely. The colonel looked at her with pride. "This is your truth, Aaliyah," he said quietly, "and now everyone knows it." For the first time in years she felt seen, not for her scar, not for her silence, but for the bravery and heart that no one had acknowledged before. And in that moment, the power in her story began to shine, undeniable and unstoppable. Silence hung heavy in the air after the colonel finished speaking. No one laughed now. No music played. All eyes slowly turned toward Mame Yara. The same woman who had been loud, confident and mocking just minutes earlier now looked small and shaken. Her hands began to tremble. The drink slipped from her fingers and spilled onto the grass, but she didn't notice. Her lips quivered and suddenly tears rushed down her face. She shook her head in disbelief, then broke down completely. "Aaliyah, I didn't know," she cried, her voice cracking. "Please forgive me." She stepped forward, sobbing openly now. "I was wrong. I was jealous," she admitted, struggling to breathe. "Everyone always talks about your kindness, your calm nature. And I felt insecure. I used your scar to make myself feel bigger. I'm so ashamed." Murmurs spread through the family. A few relatives shook their heads. Others whispered angrily. The same cousins who had laughed earlier now looked uncomfortable, embarrassed. Some even turned their backs on Mame Yara. Her cruel jokes, once ignored, now felt ugly and unforgivable. "This was bullying," one aunt said quietly. "She humiliated her in public," another added. Mame Yara's social mask had slipped. The confident hostess was gone, replaced by a woman exposed in front of everyone. Her reputation, the one she guarded so carefully, began to crumble right there in her own backyard. Phones were still recording, but now the story was different. This wasn't comedy anymore. It was shame. All eyes moved to Aaliyah, waiting. People expected anger. They expected tears. Maybe even revenge. But Aaliyah stood calmly. Her voice when she spoke was soft but steady. "I carried this scar for years," she said. "I carried the pain too. Not just from the fire, but from moments like today." She paused, meeting her aunt's eyes. "I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want to carry hatred anymore." Her words stunned everyone. "I don't need apologies shouted in front of cameras," Aaliyah continued gently. "I just hope we all learn something from this." Mame Yara collapsed onto a chair, crying harder than before. The family stood silent, ashamed. And in that moment it became clear. Aaliyah had won not by shouting or humiliating anyone back, but by choosing grace over anger. What happened at that barbecue didn't stay in that backyard. The truth moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Within days, Colonel Kwame Dlamini made sure Aaliyah's story reached the right people. Reports were reviewed, old files reopened, and the bravery that had once been hidden was finally brought into the light. A few weeks later, Aaliyah stood in a simple hall in Accra, her heart racing as her name was called. She received a national award for courage and service. The applause felt unreal. She wasn't used to people clapping for her. As she held the certificate, her hands trembled, not from fear this time but from disbelief. For the first time her sacrifice was being honored, not questioned. The media followed quickly. Newspapers, radio shows and television stations wanted to hear her story. She spoke softly, honestly, never exaggerating. She talked about the fire, the fear, the children and the long years of silence. People listening didn't just hear a hero. They saw a human being who chose courage over safety. NGOs and community groups began reaching out. They invited her to speak to young girls, to survivors, to people who carried invisible scars. Aaliyah didn't pretend to be perfect. She told them she still had nightmares, still felt pain, but she also told them healing was possible. With support from the colonel and several organizations, Aaliyah opened a small trauma recovery center in Sunyani. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and welcoming. A place where people could talk, cry, and heal without shame. She made sure no one felt alone the way she once had. Young girls began looking up to her. They shared her photos online, pointing to her scar, calling it beautiful. What once brought her humiliation now became her symbol of strength. She stopped hiding it. She wore short sleeves proudly. Every time someone asked about the scar, she smiled and said, "It reminds me that I survived, and that I chose to save others." And in that quiet, powerful way, Aaliyah Mensima became more than a survivor. She became a voice, a light, and proof that even the deepest wounds can turn into purpose. 1 year later, the smell of grilled food filled the air again, but this time it was different. The barbecue was held at Aaliyah's Trauma Recovery Center in Sunyani. Children laughed nearby, volunteers moved around with smiles, and the walls behind them carried messages of hope and healing. This place existed because of her courage, her pain, and her choice to turn suffering into purpose. Family members arrived one by one, greeting Aaliyah with warmth and respect. No whispers, no mocking eyes, only pride. Her mother stood beside her, smiling through tears, finally unafraid. Cousins who once laughed now spoke kindly, asking how they could help. Mame Yara approached quietly, holding a tray of food. She was different now, softer, humbler. She had become one of the center's strongest supporters, donating, volunteering, and speaking openly about her past mistakes. She looked at Aaliyah and said simply, "I'm proud of you." This time the words were real. Colonel Kwame Dlamini stood near the center of it all, watching Aaliyah interact with guests. When it was time to speak, he raised his glass and smiled. "This woman," he said, placing a hand over his heart, "saved lives when she was just a child. Today she saves souls. I am honored to call her my daughter in courage." Applause followed, long and loud. Aaliyah felt emotion rise in her chest, but she stood steady. She looked around at the faces, the building, the life she had built from ashes. She lifted her hand, her scar visible in the sunlight, no longer hidden. "For a long time I thought this scar made me less," she said. "But I was wrong." She smiled, strong and calm. "My scar was never my weakness," she said softly. "It was my crown." And in that moment her story came full circle. Pain transformed into legacy and silence into victory.